Jay, the owner of Maplewood Reeds, stood behind the counter of his small bookstore in Portland, Oregon. It was a chilly November afternoon in 2022, and the streets outside were quiet. Maplewood Reeds had been in Jay's family for generations, a cornerstone of the neighborhood. A man in a dark coat and jeans quietly browsed the shop's shelves for over an hour before his gaze landed on a worn, leather-bound book titled The Shadow of the Wolves. As the man approached the counter, Jay didn't give him much more than a passing glance before shaking his head. "Sorry, that one's not for sale," Jay said. The man smiled politely, his voice soft and calm. "I can pay extra." "It's not about the money," Jay replied, shaking his head. "That was my father's favorite. I just can't let it go." What Jay didn't realize was that the man standing before him was Keanu Reeves, and that book held the key to a role Keanu had been preparing for months. The story mirrored the life of his character, a broken detective clinging to a book as a final connection to someone he'd loved and lost. Keanu nodded, his understanding smile not fading. He ran his hand gently along the book's worn cover, committing its feel to memory. "Maybe one day," he said softly, before leaving the shop. Emily, a part-time worker, had observed the exchange from behind a stack of books. She hadn't recognized Keanu right away, but was struck by his quiet reverence for the novel. That evening, she realized who he was after scrolling through old interviews online. The next day, she told Jay. "You're joking," Jay said, but Emily's certainty was undeniable. For days, Jay couldn't stop thinking about the man and the book. It wasn't just any book, it was a piece of his family's history, a relic from evenings when his mother read aloud as they waited for his father to return from work. A week later, Emily approached Jay with an idea. She had found another copy of The Shadow of the Wolves. It wasn't the same edition, but it was the same story. She handed it to Jay, wrapped in simple paper. "Send it to him," she said. That night, after closing the shop, Jay sat by the register and wrote a note. It took him a long time to find the right words. "Dear Keanu, I didn't know who you were that day, and I'm not sure it would have changed anything. But I've thought about it a lot. Some stories aren't meant to sit on shelves forever. I hope this one brings you something, even if it's not the same copy. Jay." Jay sent the book anonymously, with no return address, and soon, the busy holiday season swept him back into the rhythms of the store. But on Christmas Eve, a small package arrived at the shop. Inside was the original leather-bound book, with a note tucked inside the cover. "Some stories are meant to find their way home." There was no signature, but Jay didn't need one. That evening, he read the book aloud in the quiet of the shop, just as his mother had done years ago. Months later, as spring turned to summer, the bell above the door jingled again. Jay looked up to see Keanu standing in the doorway. "I wasn't sure I'd come back," Keanu admitted, stepping inside. Jay smiled, stepping out from behind the counter. "I didn't think I'd see you again." Keanu's eyes lingered on the shelves before he turned back. "I got the package." The note, it meant a lot. Jay hesitated, then asked, "Why that book?" Keanu's expression softened. "It was her favorite," he said quietly, his voice heavy with emotion. "When she passed, it was all I had left of her. Holding that book, even for a moment, brought her back." Jay nodded, understanding the weight of loss. He reached behind the counter and pulled out a small package. "I found this recently in my father's things." Inside was a delicate, embroidered bookmark with the words "Some stories never end." Keanu's thumb brushed over the stitching. For a moment, he didn't speak, but when he finally did, his voice was soft. "Thank you, Jay. You have no idea what this means." As Keanu left the store, he paused at the door. "She'd have liked this place," he said with a small smile. "The stories, the quiet, it feels like home." Jay stood in the stillness after Keanu left, his heart full. That night, as he closed the store, he glanced at the leather-bound book, now safely back on its shelf. It was a reminder that some stories don't end, they simply find their way home.